Expenditures. I had a couple questions on them. My questions were answered. Did anyone else have any other questions or comments on that?
I didn't have any.
The other item we have on there is traffic control order, the stop sign at Clinton and West Grand. Comments or questions on that? I think that's pretty straightforward as a
Pretty
recommendation. from the
straightforward. I
traffic-
think that came through the traffic committee,
Yep.
and it's up in Chesterfield Heights area, kind of the
Yep.
last, one of the last roads there that was an unsignalized, basically, or unsigned intersection, so consistent with what, everything else that's in that neighborhood, so
Yep, exactly.
pretty straightforward on that.
And then we have a choice. We can talk about a couple things maybe. We can either talk about the CBDG funding or the KDL steering report. What's your preference, Mr. Manager?
Rachel's here? You want to do?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say let's do CDBG if we have some time
Okay.
on that, because there's been a little bit of changes, and I think for the good news, so if Rachel can summarize that for us and tell us where we are in the process here. We'll be seeing Rachel again in a couple of weeks.
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So, last year I talked to you about CDBG and a bunch of changes with the program. And this year I was getting prepared to do that again, but there was another change. And so, this year, Kent County has decided to complete sidewalk projects across the region as one project. So this will really reduce design and construction costs, but it's all the local units of government in Kent County that are managed by Kent County that have put their sidewalk projects together this year. And so, with that in mind, we looked at our eligible blocks throughout Walker and identified two sidewalks. One of them is Hillside Drive. We talked about this in 2015, but decided to go in a different direction. But this is a chunk of sidewalk that's between Alpine and Miller Avenue on the north side of Hillside Drive. And there's a lot of steep grades in there, it requires some retaining wall and some tree removal. But that's estimated to be about $200,000. And then the other sidewalk that we looked at was on Bristol. It's the entire west side of Bristol Avenue is an eligible block. And for that section, we looked at 3 miles south to Waldorf on the west side there. So there's a lot of residents there, and that would connect them up to the Pioneer Trail along the south side of 3 Mile Road. And that, we looked at that, and that would cost roughly $250,000. Now, Kent County has committed to completing one sidewalk project in the city of Walker. And when we were talking with all the other communities, they came up with roughly $750,000 worth of projects. Our goal is to spend $1.3 million, because if they're able to do a really big project and show a big impact throughout the county, the federal government might give them more funds in future years. But with that in mind, also, that's why we looked at both of these sidewalks, and we recommend submitting both applications, prioritizing Hillside Drive, and then if they have funding left over, maybe getting the bonus Bristol sidewalk. Are there any questions?
Commissioners, any questions?
And then tonight's action at the 7 o'clock meeting, we have to hold the formal public hearing that's been advertised, but because of the change in the program from Kent County, Rachel will be back on December 10th, I think,
Oh, yeah, December 17th.
or 17th, okay.
And I spoke with Kent County to turn in, the deadline for applications is December 14th, but if we turn in resolutions or anything like that after the fact, we're good to go. And then I also public noticed that meeting, just to cover our bases with this project and having the Kent County Joint Local Unit of Government Sidewalk Project as the formal name, and to have that formally called out in that public hearing.
So then, just for clarification, our public hearing tonight then is just for the Hillside project?
Just general CDBG,
Okay.
because this change happened after I had
Okay.
already submitted that.
I'm just curious, the Bristol sidewalk, there isn't sidewalk on either the west or the east side of that road, is that correct?
Correct.
But we're gonna put it on the west side where there's only a couple houses for the greater distance. I was just curious how you prioritize that versus the east side of the road where there already are quite a few residences.
The east side isn't in
Isn't
an
in the zone?
eligible tract, and it's
Okay.
if it's the
That
middle of
close,
the
huh?
road, it's the middle of the road.
Okay.
So,
Perfect, that's what I was thinking. And then the second question, just because of the topography on Hillside, is that sidewalk all gonna still manage to fit in the right of way there and will be okay there, you think? Because it's pretty
So-
narrow through there, I know, and,
We had a formal cost estimate put together for that, and I forgot to include it in the packet. I know I referred to it in the description. And I'm pretty sure they did look at that when they priced everything out, so.
okay. Okay. Good. Well, two great projects, and let's hope there's funding for both.
Yeah, we're pretty hopeful. I mean, this is a great change because after last year's projects, we thought we would be kind of off the list for a couple of years and before we got back on. So this is great news if we can get one and possibly two of these. And both.
Like, we keep getting everything that we want, I feel.
Yeah. You know, it's always amazing to me, though, that when we do a sidewalk project like these, that I think especially in some of these CBDG areas, that I look at that West Wilson, and I see people on that road, on the sidewalk there every day, every time I go through there, and keeping them off the road, keeping them safe, and providing good passageway is really important, and so I'm really grateful that we're able to do this, and hopefully we'll see this from these as well. Any other final comments, questions, commissioners? No? Okay. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Want to hit on the library minutes real quick?
Sure thing.
I want to include those in the packet. Those are from the steering committee meeting that we had that Roxanne and Sandy and Steve were at a month or two ago, I guess it was. And after we had the results of the survey, which I think I passed out to the commission a while back as well. But just wanted to follow up with you on these minutes because I think they're important as we move forward with that evaluation of the library, that sooner or later we need to focus down on a location. And I think the thought from the committee, and three of the members are here, can speak for themselves, was it looks like this campus is probably the preferred location from the users and from the general public. So I think if we need to just have that discussion or the blessing to move forward at this location, that'll give us the next step in the process of focusing in on, you know, where on this property might be the best, whether it's there or somewhere else on the property. So I don't know if Sandy or Roxanne or Steve have anything to add on that, about that discussion. And in the meantime, that group is looking at the actual space need. We're still looking at the space needs and what the ideal size of a potential addition or library will be. So that's happening congruently right now as we're moving forward. So regardless of where it lands, we're still moving forward with the project, but eventually we need to focus on which site
Location.
or sites.
Well, I think that the survey itself spoke clearly that people wanted to keep the library near the city. Now, whether it be where the library is or whether the proposal comes where they want to merge it with the Walker Ice and Fitness Center, that I don't know what the planning group is going to be showing us. But I think that the survey itself spoke loud and clear that that's where they wanted it to be, was within this location. So it's kind of up to us to say, what could we do with the current library building? Do we want to use that to, use as a police station, make more offices there, make it more generalized for that? Or do we need to move fire in over there, or what do we need to do? Those were just kind of some of the comments that we had. But, the survey said, let's keep it right where the library is within that general location. Everybody liked it, young and old. So,
Yep, I agree with Roxanne. The public definitely gave us their remarks on how they wanted to stay in this area and not move it to downtown. We would lose a lot of, excuse me,
Foot
readership and foot traffic if we did that. The main thing that I think would be a great for the city is that they had talked about merging the buildings with the Ice and Fitness Center and making that all a part of that group somehow. Their proposals will come back to us at a later time. But, I mean, it showcased the city and what we have on these grounds. Right now, this is here, this is here, this is here. But if you had this spectacular building with a glass front or whatever they design, to showcase the city more and to get more people to come in because we'd have a little bit more parking besides. So, I mean, that was a very much a plus from
Right. I mean,
from all of our citizens, that they were very strong about that.
and I think that we have to be logical and we have to be kind of careful to make sure that we know what kind of a dollar amount is going to go along with what they're proposing. But we can also look at the building that the library is in too, and we can also consider going up. So we might not want to re-roof the library at this time until they decide what they want to do. But there was just a lot of positive conversation about different types of implementations to make the library a little bit more user-friendly for all walks of life and maybe make it a little bit more urban light too, so.
It was everything was very positive at that meeting. And I just think when they come back with the next, suggestions, that I think we're going to be a little amazed at what they're actually coming up with.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, I think the main takeaways out of there were, again, the survey was pretty overwhelming. It was a pretty sizable sample of data, over 500 responses, I believe.
Yes.
With about 80% saying that they wanted it to stay right where it is, 80 or so. And about, 13% said Standell and 7% the Alpine Avenue area.
Right.
So that's pretty, it would be pretty tough to move it with that kind of response. I think the other takeaway was that, again, the roof right now is something that we've been talking about needing repair. And
Right.
if this is going to become a renovation of the existing building or something of that nature, then that would be something to consider. Maybe we wait and see what the project could potentially look like and before we step into a pretty expensive project on that building.
Right,
And
right.
just an update on the roof, we're able to get it patched up sufficiently to get us through the winter and everything.
Perfect.
With some kind of temporary fixes. So we're not moving forward with that until we kind of know where we're going with the library at some point, or at least
Yep.
the direction, so.
Wait for the sunshine.
One thing that I liked in the report from the minutes anyways is the programming of the historical artifacts and finding a place to display that. That's
Yeah.
been something that's been long awaited. And the reality is that until we have a place to appropriately display them and to have them stored and consolidated, we really don't have much more than just artifacts in storage. And so that's great. But I also think that incorporating those ideas as multifunctional, and I kind of like that idea of including it at the Ice and Fitness Center because of the rooms, and you could probably use some of those rooms to incorporate and make it more flex space and probably make those multidimensional, flexible spaces for both programming for kids or larger groups or things like that. So a lot of really great things that come out of that. And the other thing is I think there's typically millages for libraries are pretty acceptable, so I think funding will probably be a little bit different than we might expect. And I know that when we initially met with KDL about this, that was their position as well. And when you compare the square footage that we have in our library compared to the square footage of other municipalities, even in this region,
just small.
we are very, very small. And
Very small.
we can always do better, and this is a chance for us to do a lot better.
And looking to the future as well.
Hey, Daryl, could you, I just remembered Lance Werner had asked if it's possible to add, there's a lady, her name is Claire Horlings, and I'll spell it. Claire is Claire.
Okay.
Horlings is Horlings.
Okay.
She's actually the development person for KDL.
Oh, okay.
And Lance just asked if we could loop her in on the steering
Sure.
from a strategy perspective.
Sure thing.
I completely, until we started talking here, that I was supposed to mention it.
It's okay.
Yeah, and, you know, just kind of update where we are in the whole process. If you recall, we've entered into this agreement with Fishbeck to kind of look at the library first and the space needs there and the location. And the second part of that was the community center and where that may or may not fit into the library. So there's a lot of synergy that could happen on this campus that could encompass all of those things, but we want to make sure we got the library and what their needs are, and some of their needs will overlap with what a community center or senior center, or however we define that. what's involved in that. So it's really, as they said, it's some exciting energy and good discussion that we've had, and a lot of options, really, even whether it's at the site and adding on in the area where they are, or somewhere else on campus, whether it's by WIFIC or somewhere in between with a separate building. I mean, we have options here, and we own the property, so that's a big plus that we don't have to look at if we look elsewhere. So I guess the chart, I mean, the direction we really would like to have as a committee is this campus, is that good? You know, is that a good location that we want to pursue? And I think that we can continue on with our next steps. So, you know, all the head shaking, so I think we've got our answer of, as we pursue this. But I wanted to make sure we had that discussion amongst the whole commission and give the group some direction, so appreciate that. Much more to follow, but exciting stuff.
Yes.
Anything else you want to dive into, Daryl, before the,
Well, with Scott's here, if we want to do the Alpine Avenue vacation
Sure.
concept of that resolution, Scott, you want to give a quick update on that, if there's any questions for Scott?
Vacation of public right-of-way is something that doesn't happen very often. I'd say we've probably done 10 of those in the last 20 years. So it's a little bit rare, but the charter's pretty particular about how that occurs. And the first step is a resolution of intent to vacate by the city commission. So if you look at a piece of road, I think the last one we did was Fordson Street, which is off of Harding or Gaynor, I believe. It was a little dead-end street that really didn't need the right-of-way anymore. It was kind of more of a hindrance. And so you have to go through this process. First, the commission decides, yes, we want to take the first step, which is the intention to vacate. Then we have publication for a public hearing. We have to do that 3 weeks consecutive to the public hearing. We also reach out to all the utility companies and the various department heads to make sure that there are no concerns or conflicts. And then when we come back for the public hearing, we typically try to have all those answers from the utility companies and the department heads, so that if we need to get some easements reserved, we can go ahead with the vacation, but then have easements reserved for example, Consumers Energy, or if we have the need for a storm sewer, we can put a storm sewer easement in, things like that. So this is step one. The reason for it is that we've got 60 feet of right-of-way on the west side on Alpine in front of the old Baker Auto. And after about 2 years of negotiation and review with the people from Weller Auto, this was one of the very last items or points of contention to work through. And we really don't necessarily plan to utilize all 60 feet. I think for Alpine Avenue, 50 feet on either side of the road is plenty. That gives us 100 feet and is ample room, gives us enough parkway. And what it does here, if we can vacate that 10 feet, or at least vacate the public right-of-way part of that, we could still reserve a highway easement if we want, but it allows them to do some things with parking. And also, there's a storm sewer system, a pretreatment bank that needs to go in there as well, or they've proposed to put in there. Now, if this doesn't work, that's okay. They can redesign and put that stuff outside of the right-of-way, but from their perspective, they really wanted to push for this location that's about 51 feet from the center line of the road, so it's within that 10 feet. So we have options. This isn't something that you're backed into a corner and you have to do. Their approval has already been granted by the Planning Commission. It's conditional on a whole bunch of different conditions, this being just one of them. And if this doesn't work out, then we'll go back to them and they'll have to redesign their plan to make sure that it does fit appropriately in the right-of-way. So the question is, are you interested in the vacation or not? And this, again, you can change your mind at the time of public hearing, which I think is scheduled January 14th.
when I first took a look at this, it seemed like it made sense. There wasn't any major real change to the structure of the road, the way that from the center line, how the impact was going to be was a bit irrelevant, but it allows the developer to develop as they see fit. And having been approved by the Planning Commission and under their advisement, I see no issues with the vacation there at all. I don't know, Commissioners, any other comments or questions on that?
Support of it?
I see
No, I
downside.
think it's good.
I do too. Steve, do you have anything to add? Were you concerned with anything?
Made a lot of sense at the planning commission level, reviewing the way that it affected their plans, made it a little bit easier on them to set up the lots in the way that they, or the lot in the way that they need to for the renovation of the site as a whole.
There was a point in time where we were going to have this request come in, and they were going to want to put in an ornamental fence and large boulders and a sign, and there were a whole bunch of things that were gonna be proposed in there. And I think what we've whittled it down to now is essentially parking in an underground structure. So we feel pretty comfortable with the compromise.
Agree. Good,
Okay?
thank you.
Scott. Can we talk about the sewer and water agreement real quick?
Sure.
Hopefully real quick. In 1999, we entered into an agreement with City of Grand Rapids for the provision of sewer and water services to the city. We're a retail customer of Grand Rapids, as you know. We get they do all our billing and everything, and we're not in the utility business. It's a 30-year agreement that we adopted in 2000, and part of that agreement is we can extend that for 5-year increments as we go along. So we've already done that 3 times, and we're kind of at the point where that next 5-year increment is approaching in January of next year. So Grand Rapids has asked us to consider agreeing to another 5-year extension of that agreement, which will take us through 2048. They've already approved it on their end and are looking for our concurrence. I really see no reason why we wouldn't want to continue to do that. We've got a great relationship with Grand Rapids. We have a seat on the Utility Advisory Board, are involved in the decisions with all the utilities. It's really a great partnership we have, and I would recommend that we continue on for the additional 5 years. This will, as I said, extend it to 2048. We're already locked into 2043, so if there's any questions on that or not.
Commissioners, comments or questions?
Okay.
That's very straightforward. Thank you.
All right, other than the Richmond Farms proposal, we have a streetlight resolution for Summerbrook Estates. I think we have probably money in escrow to pay for that when that plat was approved, and
We do.
plat's being built out now, so typically we wait till most of the houses are built, or at least half of them, and I think they're at that point and at that phase of the plat, so that's pretty standard, and we've got the money from the developer to pay for the initial installation of those lights.
4 LED fixtures, 4 poles, and all the underground infrastructure. If you look at the image, this is south of Leonard Street and east of Kinney, so you can see the disturbed area where they were grading in for this subdivision. So that progresses, and we try to get the streetlights in as these homes are built from a safety factor and for those who are coming online with occupancy permits, so it's not such a dark area. So the area that you see on there is generally the subdivision boundaries.
Thanks, Frank, for having the LEDs put in there. It is amazing how much better light quality is for them. We saw it with the fire truck out there
Yeah,
tonight,
we
the
did.
quality that's there. As I drove up here tonight on River Bend, where one that was replaced with LED, the quality of the light is so much better and so much safer. It's a welcome addition for our future plots, and, as this city continues to replace them, I know that's our plan. Hats off to you guys for making that happen. I think it's great.
It's a group effort.
Yeah.
And, the city does pay all of the electricity bills for our fixtures, so there's also a return on the back end, long-term. There'll be a long-term return on investment as all of these non-LED fixtures are switched out and new ones come online.
Notice in front of Zinzer too. I mean, how much brighter it
Yeah.
is from a safety factor. It really does jump out, so.
Yep. Good. Well, take a break for 5 minutes, get some coffee, and we'll reconvene at 7. Commissioner Kent is absent tonight, so I'd like to ask Commissioner Carey to provide us with the invocation, if you would, please.
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for your presence as we assemble here this evening, and humbly ask that you guide us to make our decisions in the best interest of those we represent. We pray for your continued presence over those who serve us in military and public safety, who by their sacrifices ensure we are able to enjoy the freedoms we all give thanks for. All assembled here this evening offer their prayers up for our 2 police officers involved in accidents today in the line of duty. All of these things we give thanks for and pray in your name. Amen.
Amen. I'd ask you to rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We could have our deputy clerk call the roll, please.
Mayor Huizenga,
Present.
Commissioner Gilbert,
Present?
Commissioner Carey,
Present.
Commissioner Howland, Commissioner DeShane,
Present.
absent Commissioner Kent.
I look for a motion to excuse Commissioner Kent this evening.
I'll make that motion.
I'll support.
Motion by DeShane, supported by Holland. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes. This is for the November 12th, 2018 commission meeting. Look for a motion on that, please.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Gruders and supported by Carey. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is a public hearing. This is a discussion on CDBG grant fundings for 2019 and 2020. I'd like to open the public hearing for, to see if anyone has any comments or questions on this community block grant dollar funding. Seeing none, I deem this public hearing to be closed. And as Rachel said, next steps will be seeing this on the December meeting for approval. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. We talked a little bit about the board and committee minutes, the KDL steering committee. Does anyone have any comments or questions they'd like to add to the official agenda on that one? Seeing none, we'll move on to the section public comment. Public comment is a chance to comment on any agenda item that's on tonight. There's a 5-minute limit. If you'd like to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name and your address, and we will hear your comments.
Jerry Salatka, 3933 Kinview Northwest. I'm just here to see about the Richmond Farms development, and I know that this is only a hearing for 22 parcels in this plat, but in the future, it's 400. And from what I see on the development plans, most all traffic's either going west into an already developed neighborhood or east into an already developed neighborhood or to Richmond. And there's a possible street that goes through the 3 Mile. My concern is that once this first plat goes in and we start adding on and going through different phases, that eventually that street to 3 Mile doesn't go through. And what you do is you ruin good existing neighborhoods already that have already seen great increase in traffic over the 24 years that I've lived on Kinview. So I would hope that when you consider this plan and this development, that you take into consideration the lack of a north-south street to serve that area. Right now, all you have is Elmridge and Kinney. Kinney is a wide street from Remembrance, but it also narrows down. It's already a high-traffic street. Through my neighborhood, we have many cars that already pass through from Kinney to Richmond and vice versa, which has caused the traffic in our area. Now, when you add another development, and I see that one of the streets is exiting into the Richview area, that all that traffic's going to be coming right back down through Kinview and into Kinney. And I think that we have to take into consideration the home values and the residents that already live in this neighborhood. So I thank you for your consideration of that matter.
Thank you.
Hi there, Carol Glanville, 1878 Stratford Lane. I'm here representing the Friends of the Fred Meyer Standale Trail, and I think I emailed most of you earlier this weekend. And so we just wanted to get a word in about bike trails and the connectivity of non-motorized transportation throughout Walker as the city continues to develop, particularly in regards to the Richmond Farms development. We'd actually done some scouting on the north edge of that property, and we're wondering if there might be an opportunity for an easement there that would allow for a bike trail to connect between Elm Ridge and the east side there, or excuse me, the west side of that development at a later date. I know that's not part of this first piece of the development, but I just wanted to get in on the conversation, especially when we look at the increased traffic on Richmond Avenue and what that's going to look like for bicycle traffic in that area, especially as we're getting more homes in there with kids and things like that. I think it's important as well as we consider the demographic that's going to be moving into these expanded areas. Millennials are looking for options that are more eco-friendly, and we have a real opportunity here to tie into some of the major trailways around the city all the way into Grand Rapids. In fact, if we can put some of this together in a plan moving forward. One of the things we were thinking is, I know there's some concern about the 90-degree turns at the Center Park. That's part of the development for Richmond Farms. I'm wondering if that might be, and also I'm not sure how it all works with developing an HOA to manage that property and things like that, but I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity in lieu of that park to instead take.
The city of Walker owns the train tracks that are west of the tunnel. And so there wouldn't be any additional thing except for the consumer's power to hook that tie line in to get to the Elm Ridge Tunnel. I don't think that Royal Vista would have a problem with the tunnel or the trail due to the fact that they encourage their tenants to go use the trail, and we see a lot of them use the trail already. So the two things that I think that you guys ought to take very consideration when you're making these decisions is, number one, that the through street goes through and that it's wide enough to be able to handle the traffic. And number two is that we have a great connection for the trails that's possible in that area.
Thank you.
My name's Bill Cahill, and I live on Mullins. I don't know how many people are familiar with Mullins, but it's wide where you guys are coming out. But a lot of people from Richmond use Mullins now to get over to the I-96 corridor. Now, at the end of Mullins, it gets very narrow. There are no sidewalks. Kids are walking the street. Buses are trying to pick up the kids. It's not safe now. And if this added traffic goes through there, it's going to be terrible. Now, people are taking Mullins to Remembrance, to Leonard Street, to Collindale, and over to Lake Michigan Drive to get on the expressway. And a lot of people are using that already from behind us and both sides of us, and people on Richmond also. So I have a great concern about Mullins Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Christine Myers, 2464 Randall Avenue Northwest. Just want to say also that we're very concerned about the through street. It would alleviate a lot of traffic problems. We do the same thing to get to our home on Randall. We cut through the Kinview, the Visser Platte, and I can't imagine how much more cut-through traffic this will generate for those neighborhoods and going the other way too. Just feel it's a great opportunity, and we really want the city to ensure that that through street is the width it should be to handle that type of traffic, and especially that it is a requirement that the developers put that through street in early on in the project, as opposed to towards the end or maybe never. Heard some really great ideas that I think the city should consider with regards to the trails and other options. So I just really hope that you take that into consideration and not rush to give approval before. Yeah, it's too bad that we didn't have the opportunity for input like this earlier on, but I'd appreciate it if you would do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll move on to item number 10, the consent agenda. This is for two items, expenditures in the amount of $382,743.54, and the traffic control order 255. I look for a motion to support the consent agenda.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Holland and supported by DeShane. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Next item on our agenda, resolutions. The first resolution is 18-493. This is the intent to vacate a portion of Alpine Avenue. This is that Weller project. Scott Connors described this to us. Looked like we were in consensus on that, but if we are, look for your motion on that, please.
Make motion?
Motion by Gilbert,
Your support?
support by Carrie. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is Resolution 18-494. This is the approval of 22 lots, Phase 1, tentative preliminary plot for Richmond Farms, proposed at 3487 Richmond Street Northwest. Just a couple reminders, folks, that this is a 22-lot Phase 1 tentative preliminary plat, and the developer's here tonight, and thank you, Carol, for your comments, and the developer's here, I'm sure he's heard that, and how we can incorporate bike paths and trails and things like that is a very important part of our community. It's part of the fabric of Walker, and as we work diligently to connect those things, your comments are well taken, so we'll appreciate that. I also think it's important to remember that this is a tentative plat. Each one of you has the layout of the what the development will look like up front. The roads lay out exactly as described in large enough fashion. I had a call with or email correspondence with Dan Powers on the width of those roads, and they're not narrower than expected. They're of 66-foot approximate width to allow for good traffic flow there. And then the other thing is to remember is that if you go back and look through the Planning Commission minutes, it's pretty clear that from the very onset that everyone said we have to consider a northern entrance exit for this development. So even going back to the very early days when this development was first laid out with Mr. Grassman and staff, we all saw that. So I think that the community can rest assured that this is something that's on the forefront of all of our minds, and that we're planning on approving, if we approve it tonight, would be just those 22 houses, and with a design and scope that would allow for a growth, that would allow for that traffic to be diffusely spread throughout the area. And I'll turn it over to Frank to tee up anything else we have in here.
I think what we're going to do, if it's okay with you folks, is Dan's going to run through a few slides that summarize what the Planning Commission has done to date.
Okay.
And then I would like to offer a couple of slides that take more of a comprehensive look at traffic and land use management between Kinney and Elmridge. Okay? So if we can do that.
Right, thank you.
Like right over here, is this okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Everybody, thanks for coming, and thanks for the residents who are voicing their concerns and advocacy points for the project, and the developers who are making it out
Yes,
tonight. Let me just summarize some of the high points of this project proposal. My packet, the City Commission has some more points of discussion and debate and some of the key concerns and focus areas. But what I really want to do with my few slides, like Frank said, is just to put this project in context and describe the scope of the project. So this project is a single phase of a plat. The tentative preliminary plat, which is the first step of a single phase plat project, or a 22-lot first phase plat. And that's kind of the two-dimensional review where you look at whether the zoning standards for those lots comply with the underlying zoning that they lay over. But that is in the context of that all fits within this large 267-acre parcel, kind of between Kinney to the west, Elmridge to the east, Richmond to the south, 3 miles to the north. So this just shows some of the development pattern that's grown up around this area over time. A lot of the surrounding area south of the old railroad bed has been platted subdivisions. To the north, you have industrial development along 3 Mile. So that's kind of the surrounding land use context You have to orient yourself 90 degrees here. This is the layout, kind of an illustrative view of the layout of this one phase, with north kind of to your left and south to your right. 22 lots here. All of them have a minimum area of 11,880 square feet or larger. Setbacks which comply with the underlying zoning district, which for most of these lots is zoning district type A. For 4 of the lots, it's zoning district type SA, and the difference between A and SA is a minor setback difference for the side yard and rear yard setbacks between those two types of zoning. And in the longer vision for this project, the developer has proposed a multi-phase project with some unknown future development, especially to the north and northwest ends of the project, but otherwise multiple single-family residential phases of development. So this kind of just shows you the land use pattern that's proposed in the long term, but what we're reviewing tonight and acting on potentially tonight is the first step of a 3-step phase 1 plat. So, like I said, 22 lots, 2-dimensional design standards. Are they met? Are they not met? And whether we want to go ahead to the next step of this particular plat phase into the final preliminary plat design, which is more the 3-dimensional design related to grading and drainage. You know, how big are the storm drainage easements? How big is the detention basin? What's the exact road grading standards that are going to be applied to this project before anything actually gets built? So this is the first step in a multi-step process. Longer term, I think that staff has had an interest in looking at a comprehensive zoning and planning for the overall 267-acre site. And I think that would tie together a lot of the access, open space, drainage concerns that some of the residents have expressed, and staff has been interested in addressing into a larger, more comprehensively planned project that this developer and potentially future developers could plug into, so that we're thinking long-term as this gets designed and built out. In the meantime, we do have a single phase plat that meets the underlying zoning that you can consider tonight. So as just kind of a summary of the project, feel free to ask me any other questions about what I had in my packet, anything else about the Planning Commission review process, but otherwise I will turn this over for
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Power?
Okay, if you would like, I'll go through a couple of slides to take a look at more in 3 dimensions, the connection to 3 Mile, and then other projects in the area that deal with traffic. So, Dan already went through this. It's just more of we spun it around a little bit to show that the south border of this project is Richmond. Thank you. And the north border is 3 Mile. The developer owns all the way to 3 Mile. And then Elmridge is kind of the functional east border, and then Kinney is kind of the functional west border. So the area in yellow you see is what's in front of you for review tonight. But from a planning perspective, when we look at a big property like this, I think, number one, we say, wow, that's a big project for Walker. So we certainly empathize with that. It's something that's going to take quite a while to build out, but you have to do it right from the beginning. And so the pieces fit together. And we've used this model that I'm going to run through here in a second in a variety of places throughout the city. And so it does work. It's just the planning process. Now, that said, if you folks are comfortable with phase 1 tonight, staff doesn't have a problem with that. But we're going to say prior to phase 2 even being applied for, we should hold a work session with Planning Commission, City Commission, the developer, and the public, and talk about some of the things that I'm going to list in the upcoming slides here. Okay. So I always like to put things in context, and I think as planners, we naturally do something like this. This is kind of a big picture of that part of the city. And what's interesting is the property that is up for development is a large piece of property outlined in blue that you see in the center of the map. Kinney on the west, the thick black line is kind of the functional west boundary, and then Elmridge on the east, the thick black line is the functional east. One of the keys to traffic and one of the most difficult things to actually implement is connectivity. Many subdivisions have been built all through the region in Walker, and there are dead ends at property lines. And the goal there was as things infill, because this is a city and not a rural preservation township, that the streets would be connected. Street connectivity spreads the load. It certainly moves people from one section of a subdivision to the other, but it also helps disperse traffic. Now, at the peak hour, Walker's primary issues with traffic are peak hour. Otherwise, there really is very little friction, except for a weather day like today and you have snow and it's difficult to move around. Most of it is peak hour at main intersections. And a lot of that comes about just because of the hierarchy of streets in Walker. So what we wanted to do was show you on this image that we do have two north-south roads, Kinney and Elmridge. They certainly have issues at the main intersections at peak hours. We're not going to discount that at all, okay? The thing in the middle here is how do you connect into the existing street network that's dead-ended, where all these roads dead-end? And at the same time, what we've heard from a lot of people, which is a valid concern, how can we get to 3 Mile? Now, in the 98 plan, your 1998 master plan that we're in the process of updating, they were smart enough to say, hey, we need this connection to 3 Mile. So the purple dashed line you see on that map is Keyline Drive, and that is shown in your 1998 plan as a road connection. The challenge there is it's private and it's unimproved. So if you've driven on Keyline, and I imagine most of you have not, it's not a pleasant surface to drive on. And it's all private. There is no public right-of-way there, unlike Mullins Court and Callan, which are public streets with right-of-way to the end, even though they don't extend far enough south for this. Keyline is a private road. So right away, that raises a red flag to me as far as who's going to buy that right-of-way, because that's a long way, and the road is completely unsuitable to be accepted by the city. The dashed red line is kind of a conceptual line that would get us to 3 Mile on property owned by the developer. But let's take a look at some things in 3D here, if you can bear with me for 1 second. This is zoomed in a little bit more. Elmridge and 3 Mile is in the northeast corner of the map, upper right. And the area where you see wetlands and streams is kind of in the northerly center of the development property. What we put on this map was what we have in GIS, which is not perfect information, but it's generally okay to use for planning purposes, that shows the regulated wetland areas that are in diagonal striping, and then your ponds and streams and surface water that are in blue. So you can see right away that there's going to be a challenge getting to 3 Mile. Again, that's something from a three-dimensional planning standpoint that we look at and say, okay, that's going to be a challenge. Doesn't mean it's insurmountable, but then if you look at the topography, which gets in a little bit more, and I know this is a little bit more detailed planning than we typically do at this phase of a plat, but we talked about last time at City Commission was let's look at some realities of the ground. If this was all flat sand, this would be very easy to do, and I think we would just say put the road through. On this one, you have the issue of, again, this is kind of the same context. Elmridge and 3 Mile is at the upper right-hand corner of the map. These are 2-foot contours, and I know most folks aren't comfortable looking at contours, but think of it this way. Where there's a lot of lines close together, there's quite a bit of up and down. So this site, as you progress north towards 3 Mile, goes up a small rise, goes into a ravine, comes back up fairly steeply, goes back into a ravine, and then has to come back up to 3 Mile. So when we look at that in 3D, we start planning, we say, wow, that's going to be a challenge to get a main road through there. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it means it's something that we need to all agree on, that this is a location for a street, and then we need to start scoping in the land use that would accommodate that kind of a road, because it's going to have to be a fairly major road. South into the property, once you get into their proposed development, I think it's more of a neighborhood street system that just disperses traffic. But from where the proposed trail/old railroad line is north, that may have to be a different kind of street. It's probably going to have to be a little bit more major. Major means expensive. Expensive means how do you make this thing work? Is the city going to pay for it? Is the developer going to pay for it? Is it going to be a little bit of both? What's the cost benefit to the community? Okay? So that's a little bit of the background. And also just look at what's around this. From the old railroad track to the north, look at the land use around it. It's heavy industry. You've got Erickson Crane to the east. You had FedEx to the west. Again, that's a huge building for this area. There's quite a bit of outdoor heavy industrial storage as you go towards 3 Mile. So when we look at these kind of projects, we also say, okay, what would go there? That site is zoned heavy industry from the old track to the north. Is that the most appropriate thing there? Maybe so, maybe not. But when we try to get into this level of planning, it's three-dimensional and then comparing what we call edge matching, what's around it. Because we try and keep, planning in context with what's already built. So, it brings me to this. This is a completely conceptual slide that I threw together this afternoon, so don't take it as gospel or city policy. That's my disclaimer, okay? But think of this. This is where I listened to people over time, including at our last city commission meeting, including some of the public comment that we heard. So, if we want to do this right, with this large piece of property surrounded by development, how do we put this together and think over a 20-year timeline? Because it's probably going to take 20 years for this to build out. And that assumes a good economy. Those of you who were around during the recession realize that our building permits went down to 0 for a few years because people just stopped building everything. So this assumes a good economy. This is kind of a broader picture view here, folks. Richmond is kind of to the south. And again, you have Kinney on the main west, and then Elmridge with the bend in the road to the east. If you bear with me for one more second here, we'll start from north to south on this map. 96 is that double red line. We put a purple circle around the bridge, the overpass at Fruit Ridge. The mayor's been working with the federal transportation folks to get that bridge modernized, knock the bridge out, knock the ramps out, do it appropriately. That alone would solve quite a bit of backup at the peak hour. Because right now with the odd ramp configurations and the old 2-lane bridge, it's a bottleneck. And it's a bottleneck in more than one spot. So that's on our strategic plan, and hopefully that comes through. The mayor's really been working hard on that, rebuild that. Your city engineering group has a grant application in that I believe has been successful for Kinney Avenue to be converted to 3 lanes from essentially Waldorf North to 3 Mile. That will also help alleviate a lot of our peak hour congestion. It's not going to solve it completely, but it would certainly help because the road right now changes configuration as you go north. If you look over to the along 3 Mile Road, all the way from the Meyer Corporate Campus to Fruit Ridge, we put a heavy black line on there. This is something that I think we're growing into from policy standpoint. We have those railroad bridges in a couple of critical spots in the city that the city is totally responsible for. They're multi-million-dollar items. We just had a grant approved to knock the one out over Walker Avenue. And what I'm through down here was, I know it sounds crazy, but we just got a grant to do just this on Walker, which is remove that railroad bridge, convert 3 Mile to 5 lanes. If there's any street in Walker that should be 5 lanes, it should probably be 3 Mile. 3 Mile is where all of your business corridor is. It's directly connected to 96. If we're interested in this, we should start talking about this as a capital improvement item, because that's a big ticket item. If you do all of those, a lot of the background problems at peak hour will smooth out. And then also keep in mind that at Walker and 3 Mile, your engineering folks have a grant coming up here to make that into a dual left turn lane intersection, which will greatly reduce the stacking when Meyer gets out at their peak times. So when you do traffic planning, you have to think about it as a system, and you have to be strategic about it, and then you have to knock these things off on a running basis. Now that brings us back to the item in the middle, and this is based on some of the things I heard from public comment. If you make, at the last meeting and at this meeting, if you want to go forward with phase 1, where I think we're fine with that from a staff standpoint, but from a planning standpoint, we need to take a strategic look at that property and say, we need a connection to 3 Mile. It should be a fairly major road once we get north of the old track. How do you do that? Is it all subdivision? Is it all single family? Or when you start to push into that industrial area, do you add some density to help pay for the street? That's just a reality of land use. I don't want to diminish any of the comments that I've heard so far, because I think we get a little bit calloused because we deal with these kind of plans all the time. So right away, we're like, yeah, this is what you have to do, and it'll be fine. So we're certainly not discounting. What we're trying to do is set up a strategic way to say, this site needs to be a planned unit development. And what type of planned unit development is really based on what we're saying we should all get around the table and talk about. Is it all single family? Is it a mixture of uses? Is it single family and industrial? There's a lot of unknowns about this. The site itself has multiple zonings on it. So when I start to see all these questions and concerns, that's when I say, okay, we're all right with phase one, but then we need to get into some strategic planning on this. So that is more than enough for me, but we wanted to give you the short and the long-term picture here and how we try and put these pieces together. We're certainly not a let's go development planning department, but at the same time, we realize there's a balance and we need to look at all these variables at once, which is a challenge, but that's what you folks are here for too, right? So I'm going to hand it back to you folks. The developer is here for questions, and I think Dan and I will step out of the way and comment as appropriate.
Good, thank you, Frank. That was an excellent summary, and I think it's very important that not only that we as the decision-making body, but that the public hears that we are strategically looking at traffic patterns, not only in this, but that origin and destination model. The bridge, a couple of bridges in there, traffic signals and improvements that are actually going to work for significantly improving the flow there. Kenny, that's going to be a big deal. We know as density continues to go in there that the city is going to invest dollars to make that successful. So I appreciate your comments and the graphics to help explain that better than I could have. So thank you for that. Commissioners, comments, questions for either Frank or before we ask the developer to come up for questions? Commissioner Carey?
I'll be happy to jump in. I think probably a good connection back to what Frank did. I want to commend Frank and Dan. I mean, just the creativity and the work investment that's been put forth. I think the public can see that there's a very transparent effort made to come up with creative options and that voices are being heard there. So I can't speak highly enough to be able to look through this and see different options presented, but give us the information of the why behind some of the ideas helps us make better decisions. There's a couple of things that jump out to me. Second is, for our residents in the community that are here, this is the first step in a very deliberate and transparent three-step process. And this is just for 22 homes right now, acknowledging that we have to have the foresight thinking ahead. And I think the developer, one consistent message that's been through, and when you go back to the 2016 minutes with the Planning Commission, and even to the Planning Commission 2 weeks ago, it is, very apparent. It's been consistent, the entire Planning Commission, I would say, generally speaking, this entire governing body up here tonight is in favor of that we have to have some connectability to 3 Mile Road at some point in time, whatever that ends up being. So I want the residents to know that we hear that loud and clear, but really from a satisfying the requirements for a 22 house development right now, in my mind, the boxes have been checked and they've met the legal requirement to be able to go forward, and I'm supportive of that. But with a caveat that we're trying to look forward here, and but I think the messaging has been heard by Mr. Grassman and the rest of the team there. Third item is this is a 15 to 20 year process if it stays on track. There are variables in this that sometimes the developer can't control, the city can't control. One of them being the economy. And this could put some skids on it for a while. But understand, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. When you look at 400 and some homes here, which this community desperately does need, and I'll go on record in saying that because we have people that at times are looking outside the city, and I have family members that as they're coming of age and buying their own homes, they're having to look outside the city because there's not a lack of opportunistic housing for them to step into. I'd like to see more of that, but yet we have to be judicious in doing that. So 15 to 20 years, this is going to happen, and things could throw that off kilter. Fourth thing is, since 2016, I would point out the consistency of the messaging I just talked about has been very clear, very transparent. Get into my last couple points here. I do agree with the through street north and south. Do agree with the width of the through street, as the mayor alluded to a little bit earlier, being at 66. And then I think too I support the foresight for the connectability of the trails. I think that's incredibly important. I would make a clarification on one statement. This is not a city park in the middle of that. That's the developer's park. And it was made very clear in the planning commission. It might have been a misspeak earlier, but that is not a city park. That could be a point of discussion at some point in the future. But for now, that's not something that we necessarily have that connectability to. But I do agree, we need to make sure that we have that inclusiveness there. Last thing I'll have, and then I'll zip it, is I agree with Frank, and we do need to start developing a strategy for the replacement of that bridge, whether in the form of a capital improvement plan, start having conversation with the appropriate parties. I think a number of us have said before we leave office, that's something we'd like to see come down. It serves no purpose anymore that's relevant, and it's a choke point for traffic, and we can go on down the list. So I would like to see us start getting ahead of that a little bit now, because it's probably not going to be an inexpensive option, but yet look at the creativity with Walker Avenue that staff had. So that's all I had, sir. That's a lot,
Great.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel that this is a good development as well. I mean, this really fits with a lot of the needs of Walkers in terms of future managed growth, and I don't think anybody here disagrees with that. Everything that we've discussed, the developers have pretty much already obtained all the obligations that they were necessary for zoning and ordinance for this phase. Knowing that this is the first approval of the phase one, and that there's an upcoming second approval for phase one in the future, I just cannot strongly encourage the developers, city staff, and planning commission to consider the concerns and the suggestions brought forth by the people here tonight. I have a lot of the same concerns as you folks out in the audience, and I know that your concerns have a lot of merit, and they should be considerations for this project. You guys are very smart. We have a lot of smart people sitting in those chairs, and you guys have lived in Walker a long time, so your voices need to be heard. I also want to mention that Commissioner Kent was unable to attend the meeting tonight, but he was very adamant about making sure that the city was proactive rather than reactive. And he wanted to make sure that the north and south connectivity would be implemented sooner than later with this project. And based on all the conversations that are taking place tonight, I know that that will happen. But again, I can't thank you guys, the residents, enough for your voices. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Would you like to talk to the developer, hear anything from the developer?
Any thoughts before we ask Mr. Grassman to come up? Any thoughts, Planning Commission, as you were looking at this? I know we obviously had a room full of people, but there was a unified consensus from the Planning Commission now and back in 2016, prior to your time, but that there'd be some creativity applied to this, and we have a great deal of foresight. But is there anything extra that's not already been said to add?
No, I think more of the same. Definitely, there was a pretty strong feeling among the commission that we want that through street, and there will come a point where that's going to be a non-negotiable point of the development. I think one thing that I did want to say, as far as when you're looking at this development, it's pretty overwhelming looking at what could be 414 houses in an area where there are traffic issues. But what my understanding is that, I mean, phase one is what we're voting on right now. Potential phases 2 and 3 are somewhat in the shape that they are expected to come in at some point. But the rest of that area where it says possible future development really isn't necessarily the shape that it will take. And there's a lot of fluidity to that, and that's not the shape that this will necessarily take. There's going to be a lot of steps, and we aren't really preparing as that being what we're expecting. I mean, we prepare for that as in terms of planning, but that's not necessarily what we're looking at for the long term, I guess, is what I mean to say.
Good. Mr. Grassman, would you like to address the commission?
I'm Todd Grassman with J Development. There have been a lot of discussions. We've been working with staff, and we've been working with the Planning Commission. The connectivity to 3 Mile is, that's an assumption we're going forward with too. Even in that, the larger plan, you'll see we left a spot open. We were trying to bring it over to the FedEx, just because of the challenges that Frank outlined. The topographical map, you'll see you gotta climb 30 feet and like 150 feet to get to 3 Mile through 2 pretty significant wetlands. Not that it can't be done, but we are committed to trying to make that work. I think part of the process of starting with this first phase was, we talked about it in 16, and when you take a look at such a big project, it does become overwhelming for a lot of people. So we said, well, let's make some commitments. Let's start at least where it does make sense. Keep a wide road, make it go north, get to the direction, get a general layout. Like Steven said, you know, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, those are sort of things that we can get on our radar, because those are anywhere from 4 to 6 years out, provided the economy doesn't turn. That being said, the other things, you can't get your arms around it right now. And we don't want to miss an opportunity that says we're going to run into another recession, which I don't think anybody has any idea when that's going to happen. But when it does, this is going to be put on the skids for another 3-4 years, and then we're just stalled again. So we're committed to it. We hear a lot of the comments. We've been committed to those comments. You know, we're making the adjustments. You know, we had the second access to Richmond that was brought up, trying to keep some open areas. That isn't a city park. That is a park that we're looking at. We're looking at what you do with the homeowners association for that. But it's well heard. The comments are well heard, and we're considering them all. Any questions?
Good. Thank you so much, Commissioners. Comments, questions, Mr. Gressman?
Good recap.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thanks.
All right then, so having heard all that, I appreciate all the comments, and again, appreciate the comments from the residents, and I just want you to know that your voices are heard, and that we're working to be committed to building a safe and good development. And I think it's also fair to say that the developer has an interest in doing a good development too, because otherwise people aren't going to want to live there. So it has to be a win-win situation. So with that, I look for a motion regarding Resolution 18-494.
I'd be happy to make that motion with everything that we've discussed in context.
Motion by Carrie,
Support.
supported by Stephen Gilbert. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is Resolution 18-495. This is approving the 4th extension of the water and sanitary sewer service agreement between the City of Walker and the City of Grand Rapids. We heard from our manager on that already. Any comments or questions on that? If not, I look for a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by DeShane,
I'll support.
supported by Holland. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Next item is Resolution 18-496. This is street lighting for Phase 1 of Summerbrook Estates. Assistant City Manager provided us update on that. I'll look for a motion.
Have to make that motion.
Motion by Carrie,
Support.
supported by Gruters. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is other public comment. If there's anyone else in the audience that'd like to make a public comment, please come forth and say so now. If you could leave your name and address, please.
Hi, my name's Chris Silva. I live at 3100 O'Brien. I recently moved back to Walker. To give you some context, I do business and licensing consulting in the medical cannabis industry. I'm not here to try to change your minds. I think the way y'all passed that through like it was the Patriot Act, that you're not on the same team, and I get that. But one thing that you guys have always done pretty good, and thank you for your service and everything you're doing, I appreciate it. One thing that Walker has been pretty good is y'all run a tight ship, you know. The city government here is good, and I really applaud it. But when you pass this emergency resolution to ban marijuana sales, it blew my mind, right? 5,960 people voted yes on Prop 1. Y'all are elected officials. You know how many people elected you. Not one council person thought, 10 times the amount of people who elected me voted yes on something. Don't you think we should just check in with them just for kicks? See where they're at on this? I understand that not all these people who voted yes on Proposal 1 necessarily want one of these in their backyard, but they might be open to it. And I bet a percentage of the 2,384 people who elected the mayor and the 745 people who elected City Council person Duchesne and the 623 people who elected Councilperson Gruters, you know, they probably feel the same way. And the process is important. For you to take away an opportunity for the public to come and comment on something that there's obviously overwhelming support for, it just really blows my mind. And no one else is going to stand here and make you be accountable, but I will. The process is important. I don't care if you don't agree with it. Do the thing. Vote for it. Vote it down. The process, it's important. It's the entire reason that y'all are here. And I think you let me down. And I know you can do better, and I think we should. So, peace.
Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll move into Commissioner and City Manager comments. We can start with Commissioner Gilbert, if you would, please.
I'm all set.
Thank you. Mr. Carey?
Nothing for me.
Mr. Critters?
Nothing from me.
Mr. Holland?
Well, goodness, I'm not going to let an opportunity go by. Just one comment. I know that the street Leonard and Kinney and that project is all done. I just want to give kudos to Scott. There were some residents that were just not very happy with him because I know they contacted me as well. And Scott did an excellent job of helping the situation, diffusing some of the situation, even though we might have had to get the police involved at one point. But I just want to tell you, Scott, I think you did a fabulous job, and you have more than my respect.
We just tried to survive.
Is that it?
That's it for me.
Mr. Duchesne?
I would agree with Sandra. You helped me through some of those trying times too with some of the situations, and I appreciate that. And I want to thank the city engineer and staff here for your help regarding the Richmond Farms. Thanks for taking my call today, Dan. That really helped me understand some of the questions that I had. And Carol, thank you for coming here, and what a great idea to start the conversation sooner than later.
Frank?
Just one item, we forwarded you a neighborhood meeting invite for the 5-acre lot at 510 Cummings, which is east side of Cummings, north of the industrial area on Lake Michigan Drive. There's a couple of industrial buildings in there, just south of Community Park. That meeting will be at November 28th at 7 PM at Uccello's. What we do with a lot of developers, I think with all developers of significant projects, we say you should do a neighborhood meeting first. And get to know people in the neighborhood and talk to them. Some people take us up on that recommendation, some don't. But in this case, the developers are going to reach out to the neighbors. I think we helped them with the mailing notices. I hope we did. But we always offer that as well. If you need a mailing list, we've got a GIS. We'll get you all the mailing labels you want. So feel free to come out to that. They're talking about a multifamily development on that property. That's interesting because you have that property at 510 Cummings, and then the other side of Lake Michigan Drive is that other multifamily. So there is some energy gathering in Standale to do some infill. And that's one of the challenges when you deal with Walker is you have rural, you have urban core, and then you have the middle, and then you have downtown. How do you weave it all together? Well, this is when we ask them to try to do some initial reach out, and then you will eventually see an application somewhere down the line for development there.
On the other side of Meyer, there's corn growing.
And on the other, it's everything in the world in this city, and so it's a challenge. How do you weave it together while also, respecting the past, living in the present, and then trying to predict a future where people will still want to live here. So it's a heavy responsibility, and we do try, to keep it going in the right direction. So, but this is one of those neighborhood meetings that is not official. Show up, talk to the developer, look at their concept plans, and provide some feedback.
Frank, do you think that would be prudent to put it on the city's Facebook page?
We can do that for you as well.
It's a great idea.
Just in case the
Great
mailing,
idea.
if something didn't get to everybody there.
I will get with Jessica tomorrow morning. We'll get that on Facebook for you.
Gotcha, thank you.
Daryl?
Two quick things. On our agenda here, we have the upcoming meeting schedule. We do have a meeting on December 10th. That's our regular meeting night. I don't think we're planning on having that because we have some public hearings scheduled. We also will be having the audit presentation at that meeting. So we will be meeting on the 10th as well as the 17th, which I think is a
just
typical
put
work
on for the
session night, but
17th.
we're going to be having a meeting on that night as well. So 10th and 17th.
And there's a finance meeting on the 10th as well that
Yeah,
night, so.
but that's, hopefully we're having that.
Yeah.
We're still working through some of
Okay.
the details on that. And as I said, on the 10th, Doug Vredevelt will be here to present the audit. We've got a draft of that sitting on my desk. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but overall, I think it turned out very well for the last fiscal year. I think we did fairly well, so we're making a few final tweaks to it, but he will be here on the 10th to present that to you. That's all I have.
Good. I have a few items. I'll pass this and start with Commissioner Shane down there. Pass it through. This is just some correspondence thanking us for the pickleball presentation and things like that. So I just wanted to share that with everyone about that. Secondly, my new duties in Lansing will take me away on the December the 8th when we were going to have a holiday party. So I need to switch that to the 21st, if that's okay with everyone. I'll send you an email update on that, but I hope that works for everyone to do that. Reminder that there is a legislative update on December 7th, which is Friday, 7:30 to 9, with the Walker Chamber of Commerce. We've got a good response from our county and state and federal elected officials that will be participating in that event. Reminder that Winterfest is coming up on December 6th, so that's a great event for everyone to go to. On the 28th of November, that's Wednesday, I'm trading some phone messages between the folks from Starbucks, but the grand opening for the new Starbucks at the Meyer gas station on Walker Avenue is from 1 to 3 on 11/28. So when I get other details about that, if they're having like an official ribbon cutting or something like that, when the official time is, I'll send that to you as well. I did actually get a couple of emails from folks that were grateful that we had passed the emergency ordinance on the or the marijuana thing. I just want to let you know about that. Scott, just to reiterate the folks' comments, I don't think all the commissioners saw the emails that I got and shared with you and your team about Leonard and that the project, that was a very difficult project. It really, we knew from the very beginning, and I tried to tell everybody that it was going to be really bad, and I think it really was. But despite that fact, we actually got a number of really fine comments from people that both engineering and staff and the contractors were amicable and helpful. And so that really means a lot when we get those kind of comments from people. So I wanted to let you know about that. And I'll just add one last question for Commissioner Holland. The community events, the community awards thing, I know you talked about that.
Yes,
I just want to get an
that
update
has
on
moved
that.
till spring.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. All right, very good. And with that, we just look.
Mayor, we
Yes,
have
go ahead.
Officer Malkowitz. I saw him Saturday, so just made me think to retirement ceremony this Wednesday.
That's right.
I believe at 10 o'clock, official ceremony starts at 10:30.
Yeah, here, in the commission
Yes,
chamber.
I saw him Saturday, it made me think of that. so.
Right. Very good, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the reminder, appreciate that. With that, just look for a motion to adjourn.
Make that motion?
Motion by Carrie,
Full support.
supported by Holland. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.